Well, fortunately, Mercedes didn't just spoil us with the A45, they also let us have the CLA 45S as well. So what are we looking at here? Well, essentially it's the same car, same platform, same engine, same powertrain, but as you can see, the styling is quite significantly different. It differs mainly in two key respects. The car is now longer. The A45 is 4 meters 45. This one clocks in at 4 meters 70. So, okay, I know the metric imperial thing. To give you a sense of perspective, that's about that much longer. So a significant increase in length, but also we have an increase in rear width on the wheels, and that's because this has wider flared wheel arches at the back, so we have slightly wider rear wheels, and that does change the handling dynamic slightly. But before we get to that, we're just going to take a quick walk round to show you some of the key characteristics of this car. Well, for me, if the A45 is all about angularity, if I had to pick up one word to describe the CLA, it would be svelte. A lot of that anger has been sucked out of the design, and it's much more sleek in its appearance. So at the front here, we still have that aggressive, bold statement, but it's been softened, it's been made more elegant. A lot of that harsh angularity has been smoothed out, and as you can see, the lines are a lot more flowing. This classic CLA bonnet design, but still with the raised dome bonnet that we've already met from the A45, still giving that feeling of power and presence and dominance on the road. But here, it draws you back right into the car. As we look to the flank and see how it sweeps back, everything is so much more flowing here. Now, obviously, a lot of this is going to be a matter of personal taste. The drive characteristic is different, so we will come on to that in a little bit. But if it's purely a styling question for you, the CLA tends to have a very committed following. So my sense is that people who love the CLA, the A45 just isn't going to do it for them, and vice versa. My personal taste, I'm kind of A45 all the way. I like the flowing style here, but for me, this is an aggressive hot hatch, and that's how I want it to look. But I really like the way the style has been applied to this car. That extra length really changes the dynamic here. And as you can see with that slightly broader rear perspective, the way that the car changes as you come into the back is very significant visually. Obviously, we've lost the spoiler from the top with this coupe line, but as we come through, it hasn't been forgotten. It's here on the lip of the boot, and that flattens out the rear significantly. But we still get that big, bold visual statement in the bottom third, and although the roofline makes it look very sleek and elegant, the back still says business. So, I like the way that the styling's been applied to this version. My heart lives with the A45, but tell me, what do you think? Stylistically, there shouldn't be a whole lot to notice in difference between this and the A45. Certainly the feeling you get from the moment that you look at the interior is that very much it's business as usual. But there are some styling differences. As you can see in this car, we have the AMG logo and the slight decal on the dashboard. Overall, the main things you're going to notice about this are not going to happen to you until you start driving the car. But obviously, being a CLA, that means we have more of this swooping roofline. The car roofline in total is about 1 centimeter lower, but I think that's probably all in the spoiler at the rear on the A45. So what has the impact been on the rear seat experience? Can you still fit comfortably into the back of one of these? Well, now my immediate reaction was going to be to say, no. Obviously, anytime you have a swooping roofline, there's going to be a consequence. Now, I do have a particularly long torso, so you can compare my height really with about 6'1". So if I'm only taking a quick trip around town, absolutely fine, no problem at all. But for a long distance drive, I just don't know how comfortable I'm going to be back here. But come on, if you're buying one of these, it's not for the rear seat passengers, is it? well, you've made the decision that what's really important to you here is styling, and that's why you've decided to go with this version. But are there any other consequences to that decision other than the fact you have a little less space in the back? Well, there is one, and that is that we are losing a little bit in acceleration for having gone with the CLA version. So how much acceleration are we having to give way to? Well, it's not that big of a drama. We get 3.9 seconds in the A45 and 4 in the CLA. What does that feel like? Feels like this. Woo! And there you go. Really not the world's biggest difference, is there? So you still get everything in terms of the dynamism, the engine noise, the excitement, the visceral thrill of all of that speed and power, but it is just a touch more refined. It's really surprising how much of a difference that extra track on those rear wheels actually provide to the way in which this car handles. It doesn't feel quite as skittish is the word I want to use, but that sort of implies that's very interesting. So that's one of those warning systems that we mentioned earlier. I believe that would be the one that tells me it doesn't like how close I'm getting to the central line. So again, when they're working well, they're really great, but every now and then some of the assistance systems you can't help but feel could be a little bit more tweaked. So back onto the drive and the performance. Well, in the CLA, thanks to that extra track you get on the rear wheels, you do have a feeling of a little bit more solidity. And that really works right throughout your driving experience. I'm currently in Sport Plus, but if I put the mode back to comfort, without a question, this is definitely a softer, more refined ride. Jonas, would you say it's fair that we also experience a little bit less in the way of ride noise in here as well?
A little bit less.
That's my feeling too. It's almost imperceptible. It's very subtle, but it's definitely there. This car definitely feels ever so slightly more refined, but we are talking about tiny, tiny margins. I think really when you're picking between the A45 and the CLA, it is going to come down primarily to a style issue. Yes, okay, you lose out on some headspace in the back, and yes, also you have a different access to the boot. So there are a few payoffs, but those aren't really important considerations when you're buying one of these cars, because you are buying it primarily for performance. And because of that, you have to enjoy everything that comes along with it. So I really don't see any major difference in performance to be a reason to go with one over the other. It is largely a styling question. But if you enjoy looking for those tiny, tiny details, and you like just that little bit extra refinement, you try an A45 and you think, I'd just like a little bit more, then give the CLA a try. You know what? To look at the cars, the A45 styling is the one that grabs me. Maybe I'm getting a little bit older now, but for the drive, I think I quite like the CLA, you know? What do you think? Well, we've managed to find a couple of nice bends just to show you some of the CLA's handling characteristics once you start throwing it into corners. Again, that rear axle differential really making a huge difference to the way in which we can make the most out of these roads as we swing round and pour on that gorgeous power. Really a nice experience. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of this, but it probably does bear saying, the one massive downside to this enormous engine is you really immediately get the sense it would be very easy to remove your driving license once you start enjoying the full benefits of all of this power. So as much as I really want to take these roads on, and I really want to take these roads on, unfortunately Spain has not only some pretty stringent speeding requirements, but also some pretty nasty speeding fines. So I can't give it quite as many beans as I'd like to, but still enough to have some fun. One of the ways in which the driving experience is slightly different in the CLA is of course the rear view. Why? Well, clearly because the rear section is different in this car. And I have to tell you, the way that the glass has been presented with its rake at the back means that you actually have a really pleasant rear view experience in this car. Surprisingly so, the road angle is actually great. So if you're somebody who finds it really important to have a good sense of rear view within a car, I would say you're going to find this really pleasing. So what does the CLA do to the available boot space? Well, if you have a look back here, you can see Jonas's bag is not small. If I push it right to the back, you can see that there is acres of space back here, and that is of course the extended length. So as a broad guideline, if height is important for you in the hatchback feature of the A45, that's going to be your pick. If you still want plenty of boot space, but you don't really care about the hatchback, you really don't need to worry about available room in the CLA. Look at it, there is absolutely stacks of space. But come on, nobody is buying one of these cars because they could really care less quite what you can fit back here. Let's be honest about this. The only reason to buy either the A45 or this CLA is because you absolutely have to have the most power that it is possible to fit into this smaller chassis. The last time I drove an A45, I was blown away by how much power they've managed to squeeze into it, but also how much fun it was to drive. What's changed significantly since then is the amount of technology and the way in which it's applied to the car. Not only is this now an unbelievably even more powerful car than it was previously, but it's also possible to get more of that power out of the driving experience. How? Well, that rear differential is something else when it comes down to how you can get the power through those bends and out again. That said, neither one of these cars are cheap. You're going to be looking north of 50,000 even just to get a foot in the door, and that is a huge amount of money to be spending. At that price point, it's really essential that you get exactly what you want. Whether or not it makes sense to put this kind of power into this kind of car, it's inarguable that Mercedes really have achieved something quite extraordinary with it. So I guess the question really lands with you. Is it that important to you to have the most powerful car of its type on the road? If it is, then the money is probably going to be inconsequential. You can have just as much fun driving much cheaper versions of this car that still give you all kinds of driving excitement, but they won't be this car. So, at the end of the day, is it a crazy idea that Mercedes made this? Well, a lot of people said that last time, but then they sold an awful lot more units than anybody thought that they would. So when it comes to this car, I'm loath to write it off as saying it's just a crazy experiment as to how much you can cram into a small chassis. I think this is going to be wildly popular with a small segment of the A-class market. And in terms of an engineering achievement, it is unbelievable to experience just what can be achieved when people take the brakes off and they say to the engineers, you know what, just give me everything you've got. That is what you experience with these cars. Well, I hope you've enjoyed watching. Thank you very much for tuning in. Please subscribe. If you have any comments or questions, please pop them below, and we hope we'll see you again soon.